to Road Gang Radio with Jimmy Mack, Lindsay Lawler.
Give me a minute, y'all. I'm coming.
And you, because if you're listening, you're in the gang. Take it away, founding member Phone Master Dre.
That I can do because we are live from the House of Degal, also known as FASTPORT Studios, because we have someone in there, Jimmy, don't we?
By the way, this dude is from FASTPORT. He's a seasoned executive. He's got decades of experience. Workforce development is kind of his bag. He does it through his abilities to kind of engender government relations and veteran employment initiatives. He is an industry subject matter expert for the U.S. Department of Labor's Office of Apprenticeship. He has actually been on point, leading the creation of 29 national registered apprenticeship programs. He has benefited over 28,000 registered apprenticeships, over 200 organizations across sectors like transportation, logistics, finance, and IT. Dave Harrison has been a driving force creating pipelines of talent with organizations like the ATA, TCA, CVTA, NAPF, TDS, Women in Trucking, Next Generation in Trucking, Minority Professional Truckers Association, where he serves on the board. He actually was instrumental in launching JB Hunt's Heroes program. Those folks hired over 10,000 veterans, and he continues that very mission over at FASTPORT today. And by the way, he's a former U.S. Army veteran. He's a U.S. Army veteran. He's a former member of the military. He is an Army veteran. He's a business owner. He's an educator. He's a football coach, a good one, corporate professional. Dave brings, a blend of military, the corporate, and policy expertise, and a really great work ethic. It is great to have Dave Harrison join us this morning. How are you, my brother?
Hello, Jimmy, my great friend and my brother from another mother. How are you doing today, sir?
I am Dan and Grandy. A lot of friends out there are already listening to the show. People saying hello, Trucker Bosun, Tom Bray, our good friend Tim, Marty Ellis of OIDA. Everybody's kind of locked and loaded. Where are you right now? Where are we talking to you from? You in Arkansas, or are you on one of your many journeys?
No, I'm in Arkansas. I will be traveling later this week. I've been blessed enough to ask to speak on Veterans Day at the Women's in Trucking event in Dallas. So I will be speaking very briefly on Veterans Day, and we'll be trying to draw attention to women who have served and tying that to our that summit and our Her Story event we do in conjunction with the Women's Memorial at Arlington, which you're very aware of. It's such an amazing thing, an event. So we'll be doing that and tying that back to workforce development and those kind of things.
Yeah, and kind of talk a little bit about this interesting kind of, nexus that you kind of live in. You work with people in corporate, you work with people in government, you work in regards to I wouldn't call them the smallest. I would call them, the folks who are just coming out of the military, people who are just looking for a way to kind of make their way into the workforce and find that purpose-driven life that, they often invested 15, 20, 25 years in. Talk about how you can exist in all of those worlds before we get to the idea of apprenticeships here. How does one kind of navigate that world and make sure that one can code swap while still remaining true to oneself?
As I was listening, you're trying to take a breath with the short bio there that was, I'm a jack of all trades, master of none, and the blessing is that, and you just nailed it when you said a purpose-driven life. The thing that we get to do is we get to facilitate as an intermediary. We go between the lines where this, Jimmy. FASTPORT is an organization, and I'm blessed enough to be in a position where I get to interface and I can bring together, the CVTA and NAPF TDS and ATA or the TCA or Next Generation in Trucking or a myriad of 200 plus employers in space with a sergeant or a corporal or someone in transition or a colonel in transition who, and you've met them and you've been around. They're very competent people, but they don't know what they don't know. And employers don't know what they don't know. And there's a learning curve for all things and all transitions. and you and I have both been around the block a minute, and we've been through transition, and we understand those things. And there's an old expression, and if you read and used to be in the late 1800s and things like that, it was called light a shuck. You should light a corn shuck, and that's to find your way. And I kind of think we those of us who've been there and done that, and especially in this veteran transition space, we got to kind of like that. We got to shine a light, and we got to help people get from one place to another. And back when I got into this space, you know this as well as anybody, there was a sea of goodwill everywhere in the training and education space. Everybody wanted to help, but there was no maps. There was no compass. There was nothing. And so we had to map this. We had to put it together. And so, now we've got is the ecosystem perfect? No. But, nothing's perfect. Everything is like a Polaroid. You shake it, and it's always kind of developing. And we always try to make it better. It's a constant 3 steps up, 2 steps back, 1 step sideways, 2 more steps up. But we're getting there. I mean, we've been able to help 60,000 transitioning service members plus find something that would lead towards a purpose-driven life with a career. And that's not just through the apprenticeship. The apprenticeship itself, we're 28,000, or will be shortly. We're just short of that. But that it doesn't matter if it's directly through our apprenticeship efforts for the DOL and all our employer partners. If somebody's looking for help, we're going to help them. And the wonderful thing, Dave, is we've done work with Thurgood Marshall Foundation students. We've done work with outside of that framework of it's not just about veterans. That's 28,000 people we've helped in apprenticeship. 21% of those are veterans, which is much higher than the general population of veterans, as you know. It is very much in that light of a rising tide lifts all boats. Because if you create opportunity and opportunity for all, opportunity happens for all. All you got to do is open the aperture. I'm a big believer in that.
That's kind of the real game. And by the way, this is the rule of any salesman, any executive, anybody who sits in we'll call it a liminal space, a transitional space, is that you've got to learn to speak multiple languages. You've got to be able to talk in the language of the men and women who are seeking purpose, in the language of those who are seeking to hire those who want to find that purpose, and in the language of those who often are setting up the programs in the hopes of facilitating a bridge between those two folks. And it's where you exist. Dave Harrison, by the way, is the Executive Director for Workforce Development, Government Programs, and Military Employment Issues over at FASTPORT, who is, by the way, the sponsor of this studio. Full disclosure, and we're thrilled to have Dave here. He's a friend of this show and also a personal friend of mine. But Dave, I also wanted you to kind of unpack the idea, because a couple of weeks ago, we had an extraordinary young man, not yet 21, married his high school sweetheart, had actually been through an apprentice program and was just a remarkable driver. You focus on a lot of those issues as well, too, because while you focus on the transition from people from the military into the civilian space, you're also very much knee-deep in kind of helping people who are young find their way to a purpose-driven life early rather than later, and to give them a chance. Can you talk about those apprentice programs? And can you talk about your own kind of view, FASTPORT's view about how they need to be set up and the kind of rigor that has to go into making sure that if we're going to onboard people that young into anything, what kind of opportunity they need to be given in terms of a training sector? Am I making sense?
Yeah, literally, yes. And I'm glad you said it. I mean, and I'm glad you had him on, because he's literally a byproduct of one of our programs. That's a partnered program, and it's a byproduct of the under 21 program, and it's been under a lot of scrutiny lately, and there's a lot of varying opinions. Let me be very clear. For decades, we've had people under 21 driving heavy truck, tractor trailer in states, massive states, driving for hours in Texas and other places, and doing so The problem is we don't have a whole lot of collated data because states don't share data and those kind of things. So we can argue that back and forth and all day long and not come up with real good data. The thing is, we've had it for a long time. I was there when the former head of the CDL division, Selden Frischner, great man, kind of came up with the idea with the military CDL waiver, and then with the idea of the under 21 for military folks, and we kind of tweaked all that together, and bridged that with registered apprenticeship. To your point, the apprenticeship, when somebody goes to a CDL school, they're not completely baked. They're not completely done. They don't come out of the box ready to roll. And unfortunately, a lot of people in workforce development that are professional workforce development and locally and WIOA and WIB boards and in the federal government repeatedly and local state governments don't understand that. Training doesn't mean qualified. A license and certification doesn't mean qualified. And just because they drove a truck or didn't drive a truck or anything else doesn't mean that they are going to be qualified from an insurance perspective or from a safety perspective, a liability perspective. And the same thing projects for diesel technicians or even, because we work in, 38 different occupations across all transportation, distribution, and logistics, and not just trucking, because the supportive services across the board. If you flies, floats, rolls, it's on rails, we're doing something with it because you have to have all of it or you have none of it. And so the ecosystem exists across the board. And if you don't have a system that allows for training for a professional and safe individual on the road, that allows for protection for the employer, for the driver, the trainee driver, for the trainer driver, and for everyone on the road, then you got a problem. And in this case, and this goes back to the example you and I have talked about where in the old days where we had farm kids all over the place. The young man you had on the air, this is exactly what this program is for. It's exactly what these things are built for. And this is why we need to invest in the youth and why the next generation in trucking is so important, and why there's so many things that we have to have, because whether or not there's a driver shortage or whether or not it's a qualified driver shortage that is a reasonable cost ratio that employers can actually hire and put on the road safely, which is really what we come down to. There's a shortage of those. CDLs, that's a different thing. But growing your own that know how to do what they need to do is the most important thing. And the industry's gotten away from, the hired gun mentality on the most part, and those that haven't need to, because that's dying, and it has been dying. And it's been dying basically for well over a decade. And those that don't realize it need to figure that out. So it is tantamount. We were fortunate enough and smart enough, I guess, not we, as people on my team came to me before ELDT went in place and said, hey, ELDT is going in place. We need to upgrade the standards. Let's align everything with the DOT language. Let's align everything with the DOD IMAP language. Matter of fact, let's supersede all of it. And I said, you're 100% right. So we sat down and wrote this standard for the Department of Labor. And it exceeds all standards for the DOT. It exceeds all the standards for DOD IMAP. It's all competency based. You have to achieve competencies to get there. And so the assessment gives liability protection. The assessment gives protection for the trainer. The assessment gives protection for the trainee. I know it's a long answer, and I just blew up a whole bunch of time on the radio, but it deserves full vetting, in my opinion.
I had a question for you that kind of outside the box, and I will actually ask it. I will ask it in double barrel form to buy you a little bit of time. It's not a curveball as much as it is. This is really important. We talk about the idea of Jim Park talks about it. What we need is more qualified drivers, people who are ready to roll. But we also need an environment where people who are qualified and actually know what the job is don't leave the industry. So one of the things that I was kind of curious about with the apprenticeship program, the way you guys kind of conceive of it, and I think the possibility is not only there for it, but it's already there. How do we train a generation of drivers not just to be qualified behind the wheel, but to understand their worth? I mean, having military members in the space makes a big difference, but if we're talking 18, 19, 20-year-olds, they're not military. The majority of these folks are not military. So can we talk a little bit about how it is we create not an environment where these people are properly trained, but also where they understand their worth? Because there is the pushback, and by the way, you guys are not guilty of this, but there is the pushback that some of the suggestions for these programs is an attempt to get people who can get hornswoggled and work at a lower rate to undercut rates. How do we go about when we create apprentice programs to make sure that we are not just indemnifying these people for their road skill set, but for the skill set they need in regards to negotiation and understanding the value that they bring? Because the veterans are a little bit different. You guys can work with them. They understand their value. How do we do this with younger people to help them understand their value while at the same time not expecting to be, promoted immediately, as a lot of young people often do?
100% great question. And hand in hand, registered apprenticeship, workforce development, how a company and how an employer, and quite frankly, how the CBTA and how NAP, PFTDS, National Association of Publicly Funded Truck Driving Schools. I know you had Martin on, and you had Andy from CBTA on. They work together. They do a great job. They approach it on the front end, and it has to start there. Well, actually, it needs to start before there. Quite frankly, we got away from. For whatever reason, and this has to do with all sorts of occupations. Where mindset came, being a plumber, being a truck driver, or whatever, is somehow less of an honorable or less than a good occupation. When the reality is that the fastest way out of poverty in the country is driving a truck. And there are people who've driven a truck for an entire lifetime that have bought multiple houses and cars and put people through colleges or given massive opportunities and led fantastic lives or built companies. And I know several, as you do, or, other quote unquote trade skills. But what needs to happen is a couple things, and I think this is where public-private partnership really needs to happen. And I've been preaching this through every administration for over 12 years. The education, Department of Education, or whatever, from education, from the top down, from the White House down, no matter who's in party, needs to project that if you are taking on a role that is essential to society's function and survivability, and quite frankly, our ability to thrive, that is honorific, that is important, and you matter, and that is something to be taken seriously. The other thing is that when we engage and at that level, and we will engage at the level of in middle school, junior high, high school. This is one of the reasons I've been so passionate and very early on when Lindsay Trent was even thinking about next generation of trucking. I jumped in. I jumped in with both feet. And we as FASTPORT 100% supported that. I serve on the board as kind of an at-large position with Next Gen, simply because we have to engage there. Then the next step is the CDL schools and those schools in transition, and getting the other schools that are the fly-by-nights out of the system, because they do more damage down the line to your point, than anything else. The next step is the bad actors in the employer space, because we have a lot of great actors in the employer space that promote the professionalism, promote the value. Because to your point, the veterans, a lot of them at this point can stand on their own. They can sort it out. All they got to do is be given a reasonable shot. The young people have to understand that they have to understand, no, they're not going to be given the keys to the executive washroom or all those things on day one, to your point, but they are fulfilling an honorable role that is important, and they matter more than they can possibly understand, and that should be explained. I have an employer partner that did a wonderfully smart thing several years ago, and it was real simple. And it's like anything else. They just started calling their apprenticeship program. They don't even call it really an apprenticeship program. They call it their gold program. And they bring in, young people. They engage young. They want to grow their own. Their retention is very high. Their safety is very high. They have very few minor incidents related to others, and everything they wrap around it's an ethos, it's a culture, and if you do that, their professionalism, safety, all wraps around it. A standard of behavior happens, and you know this, Jimmy. I mean, you think about in situations where you've been, and we've both been, if everybody in your collective group expects a standard behavior, and that standard behavior is high, and everybody thinks of themselves in a certain way, you run with that idea, and you run with that, and you become that model of behavior. And I think that has to be inundated throughout the industry, and I think that has to be inundated, and we can only do that by getting the bad players out at the training level, and we can only do that by educating or informing at the lower levels through education.
Dave, I have to tell you, we had a remarkable series of events over the last couple of weeks. Andy Polikoff and Jeff Burkhardt came on our show for about 10 minutes, just dropped in to kind of keep up with stuff. Then we decided we had to have them back on. They came on for about 23, 24 minutes. The folks from OIDA then turned around on Trucking with OIDA, and that episode was yesterday's episode, had them on for the full hour. You guys, FASTPORT, our friends from the CVTA, our friends from the NAPF TDS, they actually understand that the real issue here, with all of the accidents, with all of the undomiciled CDLs, with all of the other things, sometimes there is a magic bullet, and part of that magic bullet is by really having everybody, just like safety, on the same darn page. That if we can actually... It's a matter of following the money, and if we can cut off the bad actors in the CDL space, in the giving, in the awarding, and the testing and training for CDL, and we can continue to have programs like the apprenticeship program also coupled with it, and they're all kind of in the same ballpark and sharing the same best practices, we can really set off a revolution for the next generation of truck drivers, because people want to work where other great people are working. And the faster we can get out the garbage, and let's call it what it is, there is some real, not human beings, I mean there is some real garbage theory and some real garbage tactics that are coming out of some of these throw a piece of paper at somebody and then throw them in a seat. We can stop this, right? And it begins with good apprenticeship programs and great training programs, correct?
100%. You nailed that. I mean, you were a carpenter in a former life. You nailed that so well. I'm in a position that, what I really do when I build registered apprenticeship programs and things like that, because registered apprenticeship at the core is a recruiting and retention tool. That's what it is. And if it's done right, it's not going to cost an employer anything more than what they are spending or they're willing to spend to get professional, safe talent that performs at the level they want, because they're helping to teach them, train them to be what they need. All right, and that's what it all is. So, people complicate it, and they look at it and they think it's something it's not, and it happens all the time. And I deal with that. That's my job, and I understand it. And I've done this countless times. What's amazing is what I get to see is, I've been in the transportation management space and other things in recruitment space and for a while. And when we have capacity demands that are super high and we don't have enough people and I got 1 billion companies coming to me. When all of a sudden, recently, there's been a crackdown on drivers who may be less than qualified to be on the road. And I've had employers reach out to me that may be less than qualified to be on the road themselves because they all of a sudden can't hire the people or can't put people on the road that probably shouldn't be on the road.
And they've developed habits that make that happen. Dave, we're going to have to continue this conversation. I may have Claire reach out to you and get you on because we're booked as always, packed and stacked in Education Station. But there's always space for our good friend Dave Harrison. Really quickly, no one is forcing 18 to 20-year-olds to drive. The opportunity should be there for the ones that want it. With the right training, we would allow them to serve our country with the right training. And by the way, Gina put it all in caps, the last part, with the right training. That's what it is, the idea that we can actually, if they can't cut the mustard, they can't get out there. There's a great conversation. We're going to have to talk more, Dave. It is always a pleasure talking to you. We didn't even talk about any football, by the way. Lindsay's in agony because of your Cowboys. I don't know what's going on with that, dude. What's happening with that?
I can't talk about that. I'm not ready to process that. Counseling's needed. To tell Lindsay, I absolutely feel her pain. I can't even voice it. It's not okay, and I'm not there. There's no whoopee and there's no sitting in the corner and crying that's going to fix this yet. So, but hey, anytime, this is important. You keep talking. You hope that the right people hear something and they move forward and they just you knock chunks out of the wall, and that's what we do. So I appreciate your time. I appreciate you giving me some time and you bringing me on. And if we can, and you got the right people talking about this. Don't stop. You're doing the right things, Jimmy. I appreciate you.